Shalom. Welcome to what amounts to the 22nd taping of this show. This is the section we're talking about today is called Pekudei. Pekudei means to reckon, or actually this is plural, so this is the reckonings, or what we would call the accountings of what's going on. So in our story, we're going to have lots of things happening. First thing I need to mention to you is today is Happy Rosh Chodesh, because this is also the beginning of a new month. The second month of Adar is what's going to happen. So this is what we just came through, what would be called leap month. And now we're into the real Adar, because Adar will back up to Nisan. And so we'll be going from Purim into the idea of Pesach. So in our story today, well, let's go back for a second. We've been studying the book of Shemot. We started in Shemot. Shemot is about names, Shem. Plural is Shemot. So we've been talking about the names in the very beginning of this. Now we're at the end, and we're no longer talking about names, but instead of talking about names, we're talking about the accounting of what's going on. Because the last 5 weeks, we've been spending our time looking at the tabernacle. And we've been looking at it from two perspectives, from Moses hearing it from God and from Moses telling it to the people. And so we're in the part where he's talking to the people about what's going on. So in this particular month, we're going to be talking about Adar and the idea of joy. But we're also going to frame it in an understanding of the Jewish calendar a little bit more. First off, I wanted to tell you that when you look at the Jewish calendar, one thing you're going to notice is the fact that there are a great number of days that have been set aside as celebrations, times in which they're remembering things. And so you go very few weeks between events. In fact, with this idea of this first Adar moving in, we've gone and extended out the idea of a year. Now in Hebrew understanding, they're using a lunar calendar. They do not use solar. In a solar calendar, we know we just add an extra day every 4 years, and it's pretty easy to keep track of. In the case of a lunar calendar, you find out that it's a very staggered situation. And so they will spend in that 19 years, they will have a 3-year, a 3-year, a 3-year, then a 2-year and a 2-year, and they will end up at the end being 19 years. But it's, again, it's a mathematical system that the sages had put together a long, long time ago. And so in our story then, as we're looking at this, we're looking into a month that has been added to the calendar. And at the same time as it's been added to the calendar, what it does is it also brings the ends of each of the first 4 books of the Torah to a conclusion at Rosh Chodesh. So today, this is the beginning of Rosh Chodesh. It's also the ending of Shemot. Next week, we go into Vayikra, into a new entire Parsha. So we're looking at lots of holidays. We talk about the counting of the Omer, which is a 50-day experience in which they spend time understanding and learning. We talk about the fact that there's Shabbat. Then we talk about Tu B'Shav, the idea of the holiday of trees. Lots of different times of celebration, lots of things to look forward to. Each month has its own special understanding. We talk about Nisan, we talk about liberation. We talk about Sivan. When the Torah is given, we're talking about the month of wisdom. When we do the trees, we're talking about the idea of growth. Elul is about passion. Today, we talk about joy. Now, in this particular period of Adar 1 and Adar 2, we have what's called a 60-day window. Now, technically, we had to borrow 1 day from the previous month in order to make 60, because the calendar is 29 and 30. So we needed to add one. So the last day of Shevet became the first day of Adar. And so we now have 60 days. The rabbis talk to us about the fact that the 60 speaks to the idea of avoiding sin. With 60, in other words, if you're cooking and accidentally something falls into your kosher stew or soup, if it's less than a 60th, it becomes kosher. So the idea of 60 is the idea of joy, not losing any ground. As we're looking at this particular month, as we're studying through this month of Adar, we're going to find ourselves, I hope, looking at right now today. I want to go to chapter 38, and I want you to go to verse number 25, and we want to talk about the accounting. Okay? 38:25. So this is, if you have an art scroll, it is page 235 in your art scroll. I use art scroll because that was something that we used as a group when I was up in Indiana. And so it's very easy for us to get from page to page. And oftentimes you tend to get lost in the fact that their Bible is built backwards. We go right to, or they go right to left, we go left to right. And so each one has its own advantages and disadvantages. But I want to read to you those 4 verses to get us going. It says the census, or the silver of the census of the community, was 100 talents, 1,775 shekels in the sacred shekel. So we're not talking about the common shekel. We're talking about a temple or tabernacle shekel. Easy for me to say. There were 2 different kinds of currencies at that point in time. Currency has been around for a long time. Currency was something Abraham had. Abraham created the first known Jewish coin that was used and identified. He was a merchant as well as a leader in terms of bringing people to understanding of the one true God. He sat at his place, he traded, he bartered, he worked with metals. Canaan, the Canaanites, another word for a Canaanite is a merchant. So merchants are those that are bartering, those that are selling, those that are dealing with money. You know, in the United States, originally, we had coins. The coins were always silver. Then there was a mint of gold coins. Then we had to decide which one had the greater value and how much value you attach to each one. And that's what merchants do, is they attach values to everything. So in our story today, we're going to talk about the value of kesef, the idea of silver. And we're going to talk about the idea of silver in relationship to a religious coin. Now, there's lots of systems out there, but we're going to try to stick to this one. So in our story, in verse number 26, it says, a beka for every head and a half shekel in the sacred shekel for everyone who passed through the census takers, from 20 years of age up until 630,550. 100 talents of silver were cast in the sockets of the sanctuary, in the sockets of the partition, and 100 sockets for 100 talents, a talent per socket. And then the key verse that I want you to see is, and from the 100,000, there's a word missing. The word is the. So it says, and from the 100,000, the 775, he made hooks for the pillars, covered their tops, and banded together. Now, the reason I wanted to add the extra word is I also want you to know that that verse has stuck out in the minds of the sages for years. They have looked at this verse because the verse doesn't make sense when you add the to it. You could have read it very easily by saying, and from 1,775. But it doesn't say that. They add the word the. And so we begin to ask the question, they began to ask the question, what's the there for? What's going on? When I was a teacher and a principal, one of the things that I went around and watched my teachers, especially a first-year teacher, was to look at the word "and." How did you use the word "and" in teaching? Some people use "and" as a conjunction. Others used "and" as a pause. In other words, they were thinking what was going, what do I need? What's my next thought? In this particular case, the Midrash tells us that they were thinking about the word "the" as being his pause. Remember, everything is not hunky-dory in Israel land as they're marching through the wilderness. Korach is still alive, and he also brings with him his own set of baggage and his own friends. And so Moses was constantly dealing with those people who questioned whether he should be the leader. Now, we saw earlier in the 5 sections, we saw the list of the materials that they needed to collect. Now we get to the same point again, only now he's accounting for it. And the question becomes, why does he need to account for it if God gave it to him to use for the tabernacle? Because not every Jew was believing that Moses was not pocketing some of the money. And so they go through the question of, what is he saying and what is he thinking? And so we go to the point of this verse. Now we know how much coinage he has. Now he's going to melt down the bulk of it in order to make sockets by which they put the planks in to hold the building up. And so those planks are made out of silver and they're made out of uniform. It's the only uniform object in the entire tabernacle are these silver sockets. They basically had a large silver pop and they had 2 holes in which they dropped the planks down into to notch them in place. And then they cooked them at the top. So he understood that this is what they were doing. And so as he's going through this discussion and description, he talks about the sockets. And then all of a sudden he stops. And he begins to ask a question. What did I spend the other shekels for? He couldn't remember. He stuttered, making everybody in the group very nervous. And so the question then became, do you know, did you steal it? What did you do with it? And then all of a sudden he said, oy vey. He looked up and he saw the hooks. The hooks were holding the curtains to the structure. And he began to understand where he had lost track of it. And so that those hooks, those vavavim, they're vavs, that's what a hook is a vav. These vavavims then held the curtains together around it and the draperies around the courtyard. That's what the hooks were there for. And so now he explains to them, I had this much left over. And what did he have left over? 1,775 hooks that he made with the rest, trying to help them understand exactly what he was creating. Now, each half shekel amounts to about 8 grams of weight. So he was talking about the amount of material that was necessary for building this object. I want to go back to the very beginning of the Bible for a second. I want to go back to what the Kabbalah talks about. In the beginning, when God created these heavens and the earth, that was the simple part. But he created it in such a way that it came in 2 sections. The first section is the section we're now living in, and that's called the world of chaos, the world of tohu vabohu. Everything in this world is chaotic. We always think about ourselves. Think about how you understand what's going on in the world, what's going on in your house, how you cannot understand everything that's happening. The second world, the world that's the world to come, is called the world of rectification. That's shown to us by the next verse when it talks about let there be light. Illumination upon this chaos, bringing it down into something that is understandable. And so everything up until this point is talking about chaos. Now, the Hebrew understanding for chaos is sehora. Sehora is the word for trade. So chaos is talking to us about trade. It's talking to us about currency. It's talking to us about money. It's the idea of everything in chaos rolls. We roll through history. We move from here to there and on through. So everything in chaos is like a coin that's rolling. So everything can be bought or everything can be sold. And the currency that we used is called the shekel, or that's the currency they used. And it's made out of kesef. Kesef is silver. That's the negotiable material that we're going to use. Like I said, Abraham had the first coins that we ever talk about. We know that Jacob also dealt in trade and barter. Who's the greatest trader up until that time? Joseph. Remember, Joseph was the head of finance. He collected all the money from the world and brought it into the kingdom. So he was another one. And now Moses is now also dealing with currency, but he's using the currency in order to build the tabernacle, in order to start the whole process. And so as we're looking at these verses, then we're looking at the idea of, I'm using the silver. Notice he talks about the silver. He doesn't spend much time talking about the gold. If you looked at verse 24, that's the conversation about gold. Very, very minimal. Now we know the gold was used in lots of objects. It was used in the ark. It was used in the building of the menorah and the building of the table of showbread and in the altars. It was common. Copper was also common, and he begins on 29 going through 31. He begins talking about the fact of the copper and how it was used in the making of the laver and how it was used in the making of the altar. But he spent a great deal of time talking about this silver because the silver seemed to be a problem for him. Now, what is Moses thinking at this particular point in time? Again, one more clue as to what's going on. If we go back to the text in our Bible, verse 28, verse in Hebrew, every chapter has a cantor to it, a lyric that goes with it. And a lyric is a very common way of speaking. But there are times when the cantorer has to change rhythms or tunes in order to make it through. So if I were to be a cantor, which I'm not, I would go to that verse 28 and I would begin to read, and from the 1,700. Do you hear the stutter? That stuttering is called ashle gerish. It's the idea of a staccato sound, the idea of dealing with something that needs to be emphasized. So he's emphasizing the 1,000 because that's the largest number. And we also know the 1,000 is also the letter Aleph. And in the letter Aleph, we have Aluf, or the general, or the leader. And so we're beginning to understand that it's the 1,000. God, he is pointing, and God is now reminding him, Oive, it's the hooks. That's what we're talking about, are the hooks. And so he begins to go through this. Now, as we go through this, we understand, first off, he's asking for it in shekels. He's asking for it in the temple shekels. But I also need to tell you there were two kinds of temple shekels, or two times that the shekels were identified and drawn from. The first time we read it in Ketisi, in chapter 30, verse 11, where he talks about the fact that the money was used to create a half shekel, and that half shekel was a census, but the money from that census was used to identify, or to be used for the daily offerings, the collection of the all the things that were necessary in order for the tabernacle, in this particular case, the temple later on, to function. So a half shekel was collected. The half shekel also gave us an understanding of how many people were involved. Now this shekel, it's not so much about how many people are involved, but it's telling us the fact that this is a special offering that's being made. And so this special offering, he's accounting for all of it. He has to do it in a very organized manner. Because remember, as the leader, he was also their financial consultant. He did multiple things besides assembling the tabernacle 6 days in a row. He also spent his time doing all of the other. So in this process that we're going through, he's giving us an understanding. In fact, they talk about this in the Midrash called Takuma Pekudei chapter 7. They go through the whole set of ordeals. So he begins to canter, he begins to change the tone, and he understands that there's 1,775 shekels that had been unaccounted for. Now he begins to tell them what it is that they're there. Now we know that each half shekel was also to represent one man's soul. And the understanding of that soul was to be attached to that. If we are all half shekels, then we're all equal. There's no greater, there's no lesser. Everybody is on the same level. And that's physically important as we go through our story. So we got to remember, or we should remember, the fact that this shekel speaks to people. Now he's got 175, try it again, 1,775 people unidentified. You see, the rest of them are posts, sockets. They're together. They're understood to be together. But now you have these links. And the question then becomes, who are the links? Who's not the foundation of Israel? He is something else other than that. Now, as they begin to go through this whole idea, they find themselves, well, Rashi makes a comment. And I want to read Rashi's comment to you. And again, this is coming from his interpretation of chapter 38. It says the number of half shekels of 600,000 people equals 100 talents, each one the equivalent of 3,000 shekels. How so? 600,000 half of the shekel equals 300,000 holes, which equals 100 talents. The additional 3,550 halves equals 1,775. So he's really saying, what he's trying to tell us is the fact that we're not talking about 1,775 people, we're talking about 3,500. So the question then becomes, who are these 3,500? That's where we find ourselves looking at something that appears to be lost. Lost in the idea they are not tightly attached to Israel, but they're bonded to Israel. They hold the curtains together. They find themselves in a position whereby they are important because they conceal God, just like we're going to see God being concealed in our understanding of what's going to happen this month when we go through Purim. God is now looking for a place where he can dwell with men. I wanted to give you an understanding of another thing that happens. The word Adar, going back in time, the word Adar itself is 3 letters, Aleph, Dalet, and Resh. If I take Aleph out, because I know Aleph speaks to God, I have the letters Dalet and I have the letters Resh. Those are the letters that compose the root of the word for apartment. What is it that they're building here? An apartment for God. A Torah. So for 5 weeks, we've been looking at building an apartment for God, because right now God is hidden. In the story of Purim, we find this opposite happening. We don't find God at all. The question then becomes, where is God in all of that that's going on? What has happened to God? Well, the God is there, just as he's going to be there through the entire month of Adar, just as he's going to be there in the building of this tabernacle. We know in Leviticus, the first chapter, he will enter into that tabernacle. His physical presence will be there. We know that Balaam, when in book of Numbers in 23, 24, 25, he understands that I can see him. He's there. We know he's there because the tent will literally breathe, having animation, letting us understand. Now, we can't see the breath in the lungs, but we can see the chest expand and contract. That's what's going to happen in our story. So I want you to remember that this is going to whisper about leadership, because he's accounting for everything that's going on, but it's also going to reflect in the fact that these hooks, these people that are attached and hold the temple together, hold the tabernacle together, they're outside. Again, I can't get one story without going to Purim in the other story. In the story of Purim, remember, it's Haman, and Haman himself buys time from the king. He's going to give him 10,000 silver talents. Again, silver is the coinage of the day. He's going to give him 10,000 silver talents for the purposes of having the opportunity to wipe out all the Jewish people across the world. He picks a day in which he is going to do this. And the day he establishes by throwing lots, by throwing these lots, he understands that he's going to be in the month of Adar. And he says, good, Moses died in the month of Adar. This is good for me. And then he throws the lots again, and he knows that he's going to do it on the 13th of Adar. The story of Pekudei happens on the 1st of Adar, just like it's doing now. In other words, that's before Haman can give his money, Israel has already given their money. Their money exceeded the money that Haman was going to give. Ahasuerus is not named here when Haman gives it. Haman gives it to the king. Who is the king? According to the sages, the king here is God. He pays God 10,000 shekels to destroy them. But at the same point in time, Israel is given far more money earlier for the right to survive. So we're going through a process of what's happening. Rashi notes again that the word Israel comes from the word Yesh, Shemish, Ribo, Otriot, La Torah. It's an acronym. There are 600,000 letters in Torah. And so this concept of 600,000, this concept of what's going on here, speaks about the people. This is about Israel. But yet at the same time, there are these hooks that are hanging there that are not a part of the silver that's on the foundation of this. These are people that have gathered after the foundation has been set. My understanding is these are the Jews that have been left out, forgotten. That's what the sages say. I find it interesting that we have nowhere in the Torah, even though we know Moses brought Gentiles out, we have no mention of them. And so I began to supposition that maybe the hooks that we're looking at are the Goyim, who are there to support Israel, who are there to hook it together, who find themselves in a position where they want to provide shelter for God. They want to help keep him there. They wanted to bring him into a dwelling place. Gentiles and Jews alike across the world these days are all seeking to bring God into the world again, bring him in to dwell. Now there's the concept or the stories. If you read the morning prayers, you understand that the Jews pray for this coming temple. The Jews pray for the coming of the God into this world. There is in their dwelling, the Shekinah. We do too. We're the hook. We're the ones that are holding this thing together because it's our addition that makes a difference in what's going on. So 600,000 speaks to the idea of the letters of the Torah, except there are not 600,000 letters in the Torah. There's only 304,000 plus. Okay, well then where did they get the rest of them from? Well, some of it comes from, according to the Shneur Zalman, comes from the understanding, for example, a lamed. A lamed is a circle with a stick. The stick is a vav, kaf, 2 letters, 1 letter. If we did that across, we would get closer, but we're not there yet. So what happens to make sure that we get to that point? Well, if you look in your Bible, you find what are called tagin. Tagin are crowns. There are 7 letters in the scriptures that are crowned. There's Gimel, there's Zayin, Tet, Nun, Ein, Sadik, Sadi, and Shin. All those letters are crowned. Now, nobody knew why. In fact, Moses didn't know why. So what did Moses do? He asked God, God, what's this about? And he says, well, there's coming a man later who is going to be able to help you. Because you see, he's going to explain the Takin. He's also going to explain to you the fact that we have, when we built this Bible, it was based upon black fire on white fire. The black fire are the letters that we can see. The white fire are the letters that surround it. So the concept is the fact that all the letters are there depending on how you want to look at them. You can look at them from black and white, or you can look at them from the vocabulary, the additions of the tagin, the additions of the vowel points. All of that helps us to understand the Hebrew that we're reading today, what's going on. We find ourselves attached. We're not attached through the tagin. We're not attached through the vowels. We're attached through the hooks. We are what makes up what's going on in there. Now, it took 2 posts going through the planks in order to hold them in the sockets. Then the question comes that Rashi deals with is the fact is, why did they need 2 prongs? What's the point of that? And they understood from that point of view that the prongs spoke of emunah, faith. You see, we have 2 kinds of faith. One is called faith in God, and the other one's called faith in yourself. You see, you have to have faith in yourself. You have to believe you have good qualities, and that your good qualities were put in you for the purposes of helping to create in this world a place for God. So without a tabernacle, without a temple, you and I are about the process of trying to make this world a better place. And we really only know half of what we need to know. How many times have you asked yourself the question, what do we understand about evil? I don't understand it. Why do we have to have it? Or why do people have to suffer? Emunah gives us a faith to believe that God knows. That if God knows, all I have to know is my part. And that's really what the story is about that we're going through. So kesef is the word for silver. Silver is a substance that all currencies were based on. fact, it wasn't, what was it, 30 years ago, I used to have a dollar bill, and on the dollar bill, it said silver certificate, meaning that our currency was based on a silver certificate. And then they said, you can't use those anymore. Those are going away. So why don't you trade them in for the other currency that doesn't have a backing? But anyway, that's the point behind it. We're talking about kesef. Kesef is talking about the fact of dealing with the world that we live in, where we're at. We are trading in confusion right now, but the world is moving towards rectification and greater light. Hopefully, you've seen a little light in this in the text that I've given you today. And hopefully you have some questions, because I've only spent 40 minutes. So you've got time to talk to me if you got anything you'd like to ask at this point, or you would like to add.